Good afternoon or good evening. We want to thank you all for being here today. We are the Funding and Governance Work Group through the Reading Consortium for Education Equity. Today is October 8th. It is now 5:04. We're going to get our meeting kicked off. So we can go to the next slide, please. As you already know, our meeting norms. Please make sure you're muted when you're not talking. You can use the chat function down at the bottom for any questions. And also, please note that this is a public meeting, so it is being recorded and posted for public consumption later. Now we'll do the roll call. Working group members, please type your name in chat to record that you are present. Okay, so you're not doing the normal roll call, Haley. Okay, so just type your name in, and we don't have to do our normal roll call. So we are good to go from that perspective. So please make sure your name is in the chat so we can make sure we have a log of everything. Okay, next slide, please. And I think this is going to go to Representative Chakotay around the breakout group recap document from our last meeting.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Eugene. So we wanted to start our meeting by just reviewing some of the highlights from our breakout sessions at our September 24th meeting. As you'll see, mainly two categories. And the first was about supports. And one of the key highlights that came from the breakout was that referendums are truly a huge undertaking for our district partners, in that it's such a lofty undertaking involving everyone throughout the district, from superintendents, the boards, the teachers, and it's all so costly, as well as so much time is invested, time that is taken away from the education of our children. And the second point mentioned was that a cause for reform was that this is the only tax where individuals have the opportunity. School district is for the reform is where the only case where they have the case to directly approve or disapprove the tax reform. So we're saying that just having some equity and fairness in terms of taxes throughout the state. And then House Bill 129, it was mentioned that this seems to be a logical place for us to begin our discussion. Some of the primary concerns were mentioned was the opposite of the argument, was saying that this is the only place where residents and constituents feel that they have a voice, that they have a say in the taxes and fees that are imposed upon them. So taking away that voice, many feel that will be it's a tough challenge. School referendums are often the place where individuals who are upset, they go and vote for referendums or vote against referendums in order to show that frustration. It could be an issue with, land use or zoning or other issues, but that frustration so often comes out in their votes against school referendums. And unfortunately, that what they're really voting against are the resources that are needed for the educational outcomes of our students. School boards also fear that referendum reform, if successful, then that would lead to the state cutting back on the state share of resources that are provided to the district. So these are some of the key concerns which were mentioned during the breakout sessions. And what's going to happen later in our discussion this evening, these concerns and issues will be a part of the discussion. Next slide, please.
Representative, can I just add that Alexis put a link in the chat to the full document. We have a longer list of supports and concerns and other things that we heard from the breakout discussion. So that is just in the chat if anyone's interested in clicking on that.
Excellent. Thanks, Haley. So our meeting objectives for this evening are to truly decide on the path forward. And as was mentioned, we're having Bill 129 as our base of reference, but also we will also in our dialogues think about creating an engagement strategy and speak about engagement strategies to truly help to ensure that referendum reform can be successful when it's presented for the general body. Next slide. Our next speaker, our presentation will come from State Representative Earl Jakes, representative of the 27th District. And for many years, Representative Jakes, and in the past 2 sessions, he has championed referendum reform with legislation in the 149th and 150th session. And so we invited Representative Jakes to be a part of our meeting this evening to give us a historical context about referendum reform, also to speak about some of the proposed challenges that he foresees, as well as to give us insight as to ways in which that he may believe that House Bill 129 can be improved, and what we can do to ensure and best predict where we can have a piece of legislation that it can truly be presented and heard before the full body to be given that opportunity to be voted on as a measure. So next, I would like to present my good friend and colleague, Representative Earl Jakes. I will pass the microphone to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all for allowing me to be joining you tonight. But I'm going to go a little off base to start with, if I may, because this is all about making sure that every child receives the funding for a quality education. That's what we're really trying to achieve, right? And so I'm going to start with low-hanging fruit first, and then I'll get to 129. I really will. And Superintendent Sheldon might be able to pitch in a little bit here. But one of the things that we did towards the end, and I and Representative Chewacko were prime sponsors of this bill, which was House Substitute 1 to House Bill 238, which is the second unit count bill. This is state money that we're leaving on the table that our children are not benefiting from. What happens is, and this affects every school district. I know there's other districts that have a lot of growth, and everybody thinks about them, the Appoquinimic's and the Smyrnas, but it actually affects every school district. And Superintendent Sheldon will tell you, Christina has as many children moving from one side to the other, and they're losing money. So the second unit count, which was supposed to, instead of being just September 30th, was supposed to create one in January, the end of January, where we have another unit count, and the state will pitch in their 60 to 70% of the money for those children. And we need to make sure that happens. So I hope that goes on next session. I won't be there, but I hope NAMI makes sure that happens, because that is money being left on the table, hurting children every day. And we got to make sure our children have the resources they deserve, and every school district is affected. You agree, Dan?
I would, Representative Jakes, and I'll give you the simplest one that everybody can understand. We service preschool beginning at age 3. Well, it turns out that there are kids that are born after September 30th and before the next September 30th. But when they turn 3, we start serving them. So that's just the simplest, easiest example, is that there's kids with birthdays after September 30th, and we begin serving 3-year-olds when they turn 3.
Yeah. So I just hope that this group here will endorse whatever the new bill number will be, the second unit count and the money, and move forward that, because it really does affect every child. It affects every child. Now I'll get to 129, which you invited me for. I'm sorry, it took me a while to get there. I am a member, or was a member, of the Southern Regional Education Board. There are 16 states. Delaware is a member of it. It's been one of the oldest members. We're the most northern member, but we're a member of the Southern Regional Education Board. I'm also was on the Council of State Governments Education Board, and also the National Council of State Legislators Board also, and a member of their Education Committee. We've had a lot of discussions about money, education money. How does it work? Who does what? I have to tell you, those agencies were mystified that Delaware still relies on referendum for its operational money. 43 states do not. 43 states allow their school boards to really manage their money. And that's why I brought House Bill 129 forward. I was trying to do what the other 43 states do because as Representative, as Nami said, referendums are very hard to pass. And they're getting harder day by day. As Delaware gets grayer, there is less chance of referendums passing for whatever reason. You can name 100 reasons, but they're out there. You know what I mean? I have people tell me all the time, I live only on Social Security and I can't afford it. And I will say this, and nothing personal, Dan, don't take it personally, but my school tax bill went up $1,200 from last year to this year, basically because of the referendums in Christina passing, because I live in the Christina School District. Now, if you're on a fixed income, that's a big chunk if you had to pay what I have to. That was just extra that I had to pay, not what my whole bill is. And so I understand how certain people, certain incomes, and certain groups don't like to vote for referendums. So I was looking for an alternative way. And like I said, 43 other states do it differently than we do it. They allow their school boards to tax without referendum their communities based on certain parameters. You can say whatever percentage you want, whatever time frame you want, but they have methods. When I introduced this bill, boy, did I get a pushback about it. So it ended up being stricken at the end, but I got a lot of feedback that people were very unhappy that I was going to allow their school boards. They like to say and like to talk about representation without taxation, you know what I mean? That they didn't want people to vote for a tax increase without them having a vote. Well, they actually have a vote, and that is their vote for school board members. That's their vote. That's their real vote. And the School Board Association was against this bill because they didn't want to be held accountable. When you talk to them, they don't want to be held accountable. They don't want people to say, oh, school board members voted for this, I'm getting rid of them. Well, that's what they should do, because that's how it really works. I and NAMI can raise state income taxes when we're in session, and nobody gets a vote then. They elect us to make that vote. And that should be the way that school boards work also. They should be held accountable. If they think it's a good idea to raise taxes to pay for operational expenses, then they should be held accountable. And that's what 129 really is about. But you do get a lot of pushback, and I will tell you, if I was to do the bill again, if I had the opportunity, I would change some of the parameters. Because, you know, you should think about the changes of what percentage you want them to do. I had 2% down, but you can do a different percent. You could spread it over more time. But there's all kinds of rules out there by different states of how to handle this. So I leave it open there to answer questions, I guess. Questions?
Thank
Good
you,
question.
Representative Jakes.
Thank you, Representative Jakes. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good, actually, if you think about it, when 43 other states are doing it, you got to start thinking maybe they have a better idea than we do. You know what I mean? They got rid of referendums. Now, they still have referendums for capital. If you wanted more than whatever percentage you put on there, like in 129, if you wanted more than the 2%, you'd have to go to referendum. So, but it's just for those little things, you know what I mean? The districts need money, you know what I mean? things go up all the time, right? We all know that, right?
Hmm.
I put this in the chat, Representative Jakes, but just to speak it out loud,
Yeah.
you said your taxes went up $1,200. Well, it had been, 4 years, 5 years since taxes had gone up. If they had been able to go up small increments over time, then that wouldn't have been as big of a hit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there was a survey done by the National Council of State Legislatures, and NAMI could get that for you, that if you really looked at the last 20 years in Delaware, last 20 years, and you look at if you just allowed a 2%, like 129 does, over that period of time, as opposed to referendums, you actually, the people would have saved money, a lot of money. That's the difference. And just like Superintendent Sheldon was just saying, little pieces. You chunk off little piece, a little piece, a little piece. It gets the money there in small increments and it doesn't hurt anybody. That's actually the best. But it's going to be very hard to explain that to people because they think that they're getting railroaded or something.
So Representative Jakes, on that note, I mean, as far as that key point that was mentioned in one of our concerns about constituents feeling that this is their vote being stripped away, their voices being taken away without that concern, are there any concessions you think that can be added to the bill or the measure to address that point?
Well, one thing you could stress is that when they went past whatever percentage you want to put on there, whether it's 2%, whatever it is, whatever it could be. Once you go past that, remind them they get a vote then.
Pass,
They
okay.
get higher, right? And they also, the most important vote they get is for school board members. Because we have very low voting on school board members. Our school board elections are, I don't want to use the word joke, but they are to some degree. When you see board members getting elected by less than 200 votes across the state, that's pretty bad. That is bad. Because when you really think about it, they manage a huge chunk of taxpayer dollars. More than NAMI and I do almost. You know what I mean?
I think to that point is why we have to consider other avenues because that's been there all along and people don't take advantage of it. So if we want to change community's perception, we cannot do things in the same manner in which we've been doing them.
That's for sure. I agree.
Representative Jakes, there was a position that was presented as well saying that if we, I guess, just take the onus away from the voters and then say that it's up to them to be more involved on the school board, that potentially politicizes the school boards and school board elections.
I hate to say this, but they're already politicized already. They really are, if you think about it. But I'm not going to argue. I'm going out the door in 25 days or whatever it is, so I won't go there. But they really are there anyway. But there's got to be a way to allow the school boards to raise little pieces of money. I'm talking about little money, not big money. Little money for operational cost, because things go up all the time. You know what I mean? You don't need a referendum because pencils went up in cost, or pens went up in cost, or they need a new heating system, or whatever, those kind of things that, of course that'd be capital, but yeah, you know what I'm talking about, operational money.
Sure. So in the two from 149 to 150, from House Bill 213 to House Bill 129, what were the changes that you implemented in the changes in the bill between that time?
I gave them a little bit more time. I spread it out over a longer period of time. But I didn't really make a lot of changes. I just made a few. I was getting beat up so much. It's hard to believe I'm as fat as I am, as much as I got beat up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But people didn't want to hear it. They think there's some kind of fix in, and I don't know what that's all about. You know what I mean? You know, your grandparents paid for your parents to go to school. My parents paid for me to go to school. I paid so that my grandkids can go to school. That's how it works. You know what I mean? It really does work, you know, that way. I mean, it's always been that way. But some people just don't want to pay. They say, hey, my kids don't go to school anymore. Why should I be paying taxes?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's part of the issue. The biggest challenge you're going to have is how you're going to lay this out with a positive attitude so that people can buy in on a positive way, that they're actually doing the right thing for the right reason. And 129, I thought was going to do that, but it really, I didn't do a very good job of that, I guess.
I mean,
Maybe you guys do a better job.
that's one of the key points, and definitely a point of discussion this evening, thinking about how do we engage the community to get this message across, that this is truly for our children. And as you know, so it was actually presented as why is this a cause that Reading is picking up? And we truly view, as you started off by talking about the second student count, that's an equity issue. I mean, it's an equity issue for our district, equity issues for our schools. The same as with referendum reform. This is truly an equity issue, and it's not just in Newcastle County. It's from end to end of our state. Every district is impacted, and that's the reason why we're taking this up as a charge. We truly believe that it's a matter of equity and fairness for our students, and the funding that is needed to meet the needs of our districts, our schools, our students, and families.
Absolutely. You know, 1 cent raise in one school district isn't the same amount of money in another school district.
Correct.
Because we all know that. You know what I mean? So it is an equity issue. And that's why the school boards are in the best shape to figure that out. Even though they're reluctant to do it, but they are the ones that should be able to take that issue. I mean, that is part of their job. You know what I mean? When people say, well, I don't want them determining this whatever percentage that's in 129. But think about it. They determine everything for the referendum. All the numbers for the referendum, where do they come from? The school board. But they're held under this little thing called the referendum. And when the voters think about the referendum, whether it's good or bad, they don't hold the school board members accountable to that. It's the referendum. It's the referendum. Well, it's actually the school board. The school board's the one that comes up with the numbers. That's where it comes from. You know, but they hold behind this veil called the referendum, as opposed to what it really is all about. That's why 129 or whatever that you want to call that item is basically the same thing. It just isn't called a referendum.
Yes.
It's really not called a referendum. It's just going operational money or whatever words you want to come up with. If you come up with some good words for it, that might be a way to do it. But
absolutely. Well, we definitely appreciate your insight, Representative Jakes, and hope you'll stay on with us as we continue this discussion into House Bill 129. We'll go into the next slide. We have a few questions to present to the group. And again, hope you will assist us in trying to address them as we think of a way forward. The first question we want to present is how do we as a group feel about the language in House Bill 129 as far as what's needed? Representative Jakes mentioned some of the parameters that may need to be changed, and then it talks about the bill number. Of course, it probably will have a new bill number. Once it's presented, we can request the same bill number, but most likely we'll have a different bill number. And then what do we as a working group, what are some of the key things that we think, if anything, should be modified about House Bill 129, using House Bill 29 as our base for the new legislation that we would like to present. So we start that discussion, and just to begin it, I mean, if you have endpoints, maybe additional questions of Representative Jakes to help guide this discussion. We welcome that input now.
Nami, if I may,
Yes, sir.
I think one of the things you want to think about is what percentage do you want the school board to be able to do? You know, you could do little things like they get 1%, okay? And then after the public gets a chance to talk about what they did with that 1%, then they could add another percent or whatever, you know what I mean? I'm saying it could be incremental as opposed to one solid amount, because
Right.
some states do it that way.
Okay.
In other words, they vote, they give the authority for a certain percentage, and then they're held accountable for that percentage. What did they do with that percentage?
Yes.
And then once that's explained in a school board meeting or whatever, then they take another vote in the school board and go to the next percentage. So you could do it incrementally, which is not in my bill, but you could do it that way. And I know some states do it that way. I'm just offering that as a suggestion.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Are there other comments on the questions?
Hi, this is Jill from Red Clay. I'm the CFO at Red Clay, and I had worked with Representative Jakes and Superintendent Doherty and Superintendent Shelton at the time, way back when it was first introduced. And one of the things, and that there's a lot of fears that Representative Jakes talked about. And so the effort in the bill was to say, there's a number of factors, right? If somebody thinks that there's just, you know, free reign to raise taxes unlimited, that is scary, right? And so are there controls? And so I think that the attempt was, and maybe we can tighten those, the attempt was to put controls in place that said, here's the limit on what the amount could be. But at the same time, you can't have, you know, runaway budget growth and do this just to, you know, for the sake of doing it. For the same reason, and I think the one thing we didn't talk about, there was, from the school board level, there was a great fear that the state was going to shift cuts to the districts, right? That the amount of money at the state level, that this would just be an excuse to make the school districts on the local side cover what the state wanted to cut. And so that is why in the bill, it specifically attempted to address that fear, right? That the state's not going to do that and that it would remain level funding. So whether or not that worked, but kind of addressing those by putting controls in place, I think is the way to, you know, persuade people that, no, it can't do that. It can only do this, right? And that, and that was the effort or the mechanism to kind of control or to, you know, talk to the naysayers to say, no, it actually can't do that because look, this provision is in place.
Good point, Jill.
Yes, thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Representative Ramon is with us. He has a question.
Another question?
Thank you, Nami. No, I don't really have a question. I think what Jill was referring to was exactly what I was going to bring up. Earl's efforts last time were very good, except the fear of people feeling we were depriving, you know, local control. And years ago, Earl, we got into this together at the beginning. We did the modification for how the VOTEC schools do their thing, what they get an allotment, and then they have to basically budget out their schools. If we could do three basic things: number one, set the parameter of a certain percentage within a certain period of time that they may use up and down in some sort of a continuum, just like we do with the VOTECs. Simultaneously, give these school boards and these superintendents and these principals more autonomy on how they can spend their money and what they can spend it on within their world, because everybody's world's different. And then third, have a continuum of a ratio of how much money we invest in every building rather than going to building referendums based on the age, need for renovations and repairs, and maintenance, because quite frankly, the older buildings need a lot more than the newer buildings. So those three continuums are just basically math. If we could just agree on the three aspects, and what those aspects do is it keeps control with the school board that will decide, we're only going to take this much of it, we're going to take that much of it. You know, maybe you do some sort of a minimum, they get a cost of living minimum of 0.5% a year, but they could go up to 2%, like Earl said. But if they choose not to, that number rolls and they can only take it when they need it. Some people perceive others would jump right away and take the maximums right out of the gates all the time, but I don't think so. I think our districts and our superintendents are very responsible, just like our VOTEC schools are. They don't go and jump to the top at the beginning. They gently monitor how they run and fund their educational system. So I think Earl's got a lot of the pieces. I just think there needs to be some modifications. And the one that needs to be put back into the people's hand is people can't perceive they're losing the ability to influence the decisions, or you're never going to get it passed, because people want to know they have local control over their schools' fundings and their school environments. I'm sorry, I'm kind of walking around lip dropping at the same time that I'm doing my thing here. So I got two worlds going on at once, but I just wanted to drop that in there, and I'll go back to being invisible. Earl, thank you. You were great at the role of running our
I thought you
education.
were sitting in the lawn chair or seeing all them trees and stuff in the back.
I know. Well, I'm trying to stay where there's no dogs barking, to tell you the truth, but you know how it is. So sorry to interrupt, guys, but thank you for listening.
No, thank you,
Representative
for
Ramon.
your comment, Representative Ramon. Superintendent Sheldon, I was wondering if a couple of the points that he mentioned, if you could, especially the two about the autonomy and about the ratios, the breakdown for the school building, ways in which we may try to incorporate that.
So I think I agree with the premise of what Representative Ramon was saying. I see that as potentially how, so there's been a long talk for quite some time that our minor cap is not sufficient for maintaining buildings. And I really think that's what Representative Ramon was getting at, because our older buildings require much more upkeep than our newer buildings, which is absolutely true. And we see there's two examples recently, right, where older buildings had, we didn't have enough minor cap to do the major work that was required, where if we had additional minor cap for those older buildings, maybe we'd be able to keep up, and maybe we'd keep ourselves from having to go to a major capital referendum, because we keep up with things like most major caps are because HVAC has to be replaced. That's such a large expense that you usually have to do that under major cap. Where if our minor cap was a little bit more appropriate for the age and longevity of the building, then maybe we'd have less of these major caps and be able to actually maintain our buildings instead of kind of letting them fall apart and rebuilding them, letting them fall apart and rebuilding them. Because I don't remember the exact number, and there's some business managers on here that I'm sure do know the exact number, but I want to say the deferred maintenance that was documented was in like the multi-million to billion-dollar range when they did that study a couple years ago. Jill or Chuck, I know I saw both of you on. Do either of you remember that number?
Yeah, it's like a 1.5 billion, and that's just a very round number. It's who knows? It's probably more than that.
That's just the documented. That's the things that people actually bothered to put in the system and say it was maintenance that needed to be deferred. So minor cap isn't doing it, and we end up then with major problems. So the second thing, as far as the how do you figure out where we go? You know, the problem people were saying was, well, if you only limit it to CPI, when a big expense does hit, so for example, the big one that's come up recently is healthcare, right? Our healthcare costs have really skyrocketed. So there was a group that was saying, well, that a 2% of CPI might not be enough in some years. And once you give that operating, no one will ever allow a referendum to pass. So then in that year that CPI isn't enough to keep us whole, we end up falling further and further behind, and we can never catch back up because no one will ever pass enough referendum after this. One of the things that I've suggested is something similar to Pennsylvania, where that rate is set. Potentially that's done in JFC, where so that in any given year they can adjust. They can say, okay, we're going to use CPI this year, or they can say, hey, guess what? Blue Cross Blue Shield went up astronomically. We need to give districts a little bit more to make up for that. Or, which I think is one of the critical areas that we don't deal with on a regular basis, is legislature just added these 7 positions to schools because you desperately needed them. But the local side is never part of that. So maybe on the year where we add positions for low income, or we add social workers, or we add funding for guidance counselors or psychologists like we've done over the last couple of sessions, that rate is also raised just a little bit so we can cover the local side of those positions. Because a lot of times we're not going to referendum because we are getting anything more. We're going to referendum just to keep up with what the state has cut and what the state has added on to our local taxes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And can I follow up with Dr. Shelton real quickly? It's Mike Ramone again.
Yes, sir.
I think Dr. Shelton obviously said it much better than I did, but the concept is you need to create an environment where you and all the distractions of funding education in a positive way implemented, even if you have to go gentle at first and adjust it in the future. And maybe that means a piece here and a piece there and a piece again in a year and a 2 and a 3. But the most important part of this, I think that a lot of us miss sight of, we do all this to be able to guarantee our children get the best educations they can, right? Every kid has their cup. We try to fill the cups to the top with the environment we have, and it's very challenging in our school system because there's so much diversity. However, the biggest thing we miss is if you're putting a child in a facility that they feel is a dump or they feel it isn't at the level of others, you've already made it even more difficult for the teachers to try to guarantee success. If the kids don't feel good about where they're going, then nothing else works. And the fact that we've ignored so much of that side of it for so long is a part of the educational process that I think we're really missing sight of. But Dr. Shelton, he gets it. He knows it. I'm glad he's where he is and what he's doing, because I think he's going to be a big plus for Christina and for hopefully this process. But guys, we need to just do it better, and we need to sit around a table and work together, and I think we can do that. So
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Jakes, Dr. Shelton mentioned about having CPI separate through JFC. Could you address that?
Not really. I really can't. I don't know where we'd go there.
Okay. Okay. Appreciate it.
Chuck Longfellow might help you.
Chuck, any thoughts on that one, sir?
No, not really. It depends on if, I guess, the General Assembly and with the approval of the governor and the law that they write say that they want OMB to have a role in setting the maximum. Some states do that. Some counties do that in other states. It's just a matter of what the General Assembly wants to put in the bill.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Chakotcha, can I just ask if, because I know Senator Sturgeon, I believe, was the Senate Prime, if she had anything that she wanted to add to Representative Ramone or Representative Jake's comments.
Thank you very much. I think that the comments that have been made capture it really well. I've spoken to this group before, last time we met, about how much I support this legislation. I obviously saw for 25 years as a public school teacher how the efforts to pass a referendum really take away from our number one duty as educators, which is to focus on education. You know, we have to turn into marketers, politicians, I don't know. We have to spend so much time planning for a referendum, selling it to the public, often failing on the first try and then having to go back and do it all again. It's a lot of drain on a system that isn't set up for that. We're set up to teach and to educate and nurture our students. And I would like to make sure that part of our efforts to inform the public why we need this change is so that we can get to the business of educating and not have to be in the business of raising money. I mean, it's like saying you got to have a bake sale to raise money to educate, you know, our children. It's ridiculous. So everyone knows, I think, that I'm a big proponent of this. I will be happy to be prime sponsor again if the Reading Consortium decides to make this one of their recommendations, or co-prime, or what have you. I just want to see what we need to do to address the main concerns. The one that if you only have referendum for operating and not for capital, and we still have to go out to referendum in order to raise money for capital expenses, then I do see where people are afraid we'd never be able to pass that other referendum. So what's the solution? What do the other states do? Do they have referendum for I mean, do they have, you know, do the school boards raise money for all the local portion? I think that's probably the one argument that resonates with me a little bit, that I hear from the school board members. Other than that, we need to move forward and get this done, and I'm ready to do that, as well as my working group of parents and teachers who want to see the end to referendum, many of whom are on again today. Thank you.
And Laura, if I can, Earl Jakes, by the way, good seeing you.
Yes, hello, Earl. Nice to see you.
When a referendum fails, it affects so many people, including students. I have seen, and I've been to school districts where referendums have failed a couple times in a row. And you want to talk about complete deflating the education system. Everybody, including teachers and staff and students, are so down about that. And you know what I mean? So that's one of the reasons 129, if we could get it to work or some way, it would be such a plus for our education system as a whole. Not just, you know what I mean? When you think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
that
I guess
positive
I
little
always-
piece. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Laura.
You're absolutely right. The most important thing is how it ultimately impacts the students and our ability to, you know, educate them the best we can. When the referendum fails, that means cuts. That means larger class sizes. That means fewer programs. And we're talking about research-based programs that we know help students learn. You know, music and sports. All those play a role in helping students learn. Music is amazing for helping students learn math, and sports keep the kids healthy, and sometimes are, you know, the reason they enjoy going to school. They look forward to their sports programs. All of those things are the first to get cut. The arts, the athletics, and yeah, and the morale. I mean, the morale hurts everyone. I mean, it's so hard in a way to argue, because those of us who are in education feel it so deeply that we just can't imagine anyone doesn't get it. But indeed, there are many people in public who don't get it. And those were the people who came out and spoke loudly against this bill. And we have to be ready for them. But we just have to get our arguments, you know, thought through. And everyone need if this is what's recommended, we're going to need letter writing to the editor, op-eds written. We really need to work on our messaging, so that we win the messaging wars. Because I feel like the message, you know, was really won by the other side who didn't want this. That whole idea of we're taking away people's voice. We have to figure out how we counteract that. Well, you're taking away the students' stability. You're taking away the ability to plan, because districts don't know whether they're going to have the money or not, because it's up to the whim of the few people who show up to vote. There's a lot that we could package, you know, these reforms with better messaging, so that we win that the communications battle.
Hi, this is Tika again. I think the messaging is absolutely going to be key, and proactively thinking about ways to engage the public. Because I can tell you, as someone who is an educator, as someone who has family in education, we did not support that. And I can also tell you, as someone with a political science degree. So I understand how it's set up, and that many people keep funneling the voice and the influence piece back to the school board. And like I stated, you know, people don't really exercise that. So if we want to get in front of something and think that people really use this referendum vote as a way to say, hey, I'm not happy about something, find ways to give them that place before we ever get to the referendum. So if we're not proactive in thinking about how we're going to engage them and the policies beforehand, before we even message it, you are not going to get it across. And I can tell you, I'm probably one of the biggest people to test that on, because there is a ton of community folks that come across that I have these discussions with, which is why I'm bringing them back to you.
Thank you for that.
I think absolutely the point is well taken, and as Representative Jake stressed, that, I mean, that's been one of the sticking points of why it hasn't gone forward. So we realize that it is definitely a huge mountain that we have to climb. But the point I believe that hasn't been the focus is our children. And then once we begin to bring the focus back to our children, bring the focus back to our core mission of educational equity, it helps to turn that tide. When we're thinking about, especially in the current times in which we live, where everyone's thinking about how can our society be more just. This is a true issue of just having just and fair schools, fair funding available for our students. This is that same call, that cry that we're having in so many other sectors of our society. It's just one that we have to let individuals realize that just because you have this opportunity to vote on this measure doesn't necessarily mean that you're voting against this or voting against that. What we want to say is that this is a vote for our children. This measure is for our children, for our future, to truly give them the resources that are necessary so that we can begin to just truly invest in our future. That there are children, and we know that currently our funding model doesn't meet the needs of all of our students, all of our schools or districts.
You know, Nami, when you think about this pandemic, right, and the calls that you've heard, right, children upset that they don't get to socialize and meet their friends. They don't get to go to school because they wanted to see a certain teacher that's impacted their life, or they don't get to go and do music or art or sports. All that is affected by if you don't fund the schools properly. And that's what it really comes down to. We need to play every one of those little things out. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to echo Representative Jakes from earlier, where I agree with House Bill 129. And I also do think that if voters and constituents do have issues with the funding and not referendums, but increases in taxes due to increasing the educational services, then you vote out the school board. I think that's where you have your voice heard. So I just want to echo Representative Jakes, and I do agree with that. And I like House Bill 129, and I think that we should be in favor of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any additional comments? And I mean, what we've heard so far, all of these points are going to be well noted, and they will be discussion points as we continue to look at House Bill 129, what ways in which we can enhance it, and things that we can truly bring to this measure, try to help it to be successful.
I think Senator Del Solo.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good. Sorry, I'm using a different rig today for this, so I'm glad that it works. So it seems to me that there are a few ways to get at solutions from a practical standpoint to some of the concerns that I'm hearing as I've listened to the conversation. Number one, if we're concerned about people say, then it seems to me that we should be concerned about how frequently people can vote for school board members, and that we should be concerned about when those elections take place and whether it makes sense to align them maybe with certain other local races, understanding that they're nonpartisan and that would have to be looked at. But perhaps one of the things that is a concern, if we're saying that we're removing some ability to have an impact on an important decision for folks in this manner, and the other way to express one's viewpoint of whether something's being handled appropriately is to vote upon the board members, maybe we should look at another bill in conjunction with this to reform some of the way, so it's not like an odd 5-year period of time that members serve. Maybe that's something that can be looked at to emphasize the idea that we want folks to be able to have input in the process, and that they should pay very close attention to who's serving on the school boards because it's a pivotal role in policy. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning, and I kind of crystallized my viewpoint on this in some of the prior discussions that we had at the previous working group meeting, but I also think it's very much worth addressing the issue of reassessment and making sure that we're solving that quandary in conjunction with addressing this. Because from a perspective of fundamental fairness, I do think that just from looking at plain old, like what's acceptable, and when you're explaining this to someone, given the ruling of the court, and obviously there's going to be guidance there, but depending upon how long that litigation comes to resolve itself or what the options are, I think we have to be willing to move ahead with trying to address the reassessment issue so that we're not in a situation where we are we're authorizing someone to raise taxes essentially on a system that we know to be incorrect under the law or otherwise illegal. So I just believe that systematically there's a broad way that we can address some of these concerns, and it would be hard work. I know that there are a lot of folks out there in the public that strongly object to this sort of reform, but I think there are other ways to mitigate those concerns and get to that, get to yes, by viewing other methods to address the degree of community input, making sure that we're proceeding in a manner that's consistent with other aspects of the law, and that we're kind of holistically looking at the system that's developed and the flaws which kind of interlock and relate to one another. So that's my 2 cents, listening to the conversation, looking at some of the concerns, and maybe there are some ways, if we're a bit imaginative and pragmatic, that we can get at solving these problems, even if it's not specifically in a bill like 129, but other bills that would, I think, be good companion pieces to addressing these concerns.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, sorry, it's Tika
Go ahead,
again.
Tika.
And I really appreciate Senator Delfolo's points, because those are the type of things that will get people like me to a yes. And then one of the first steps that I also think as we're discussing whether we reword the bill or change it is looking at the strategies with the education and advocacy pieces before even moving to it being a bill. And so thinking of different strategies to engage the community in those discussions, and I know town halls have been something that's popular, but again, I feel like that's the same way that we've done things and we still haven't captured the same folks. So looking at other things, like whether there were street teams, or instead of having a town hall where the people come to us, we go to the people. We've done it with campaigns where people hold coffee meetings or fundraisers in their house, but local community people could actually hold those meetings in their homes and have people from the commission or others come to speak and do that advocacy and education as well. And I think that's the only way that you're really going to get out into the community, is to go to them and stop waiting for them to come to us.
Well said. Thank you.
Appreciate the
You're
comment.
welcome.
If there are no additional concerns, again, everything that's been mentioned, we've captured, and we will present it and will continue to be put into our discussion as we look at, again, ways to enhance House Bill 129. We'll proceed to the next slide, and a lot of our conversation has been about the engagement and how are we going to engage our communities in this process, as far as informing them about what the changes really mean and about what would be the true purpose of this new House bill. So I'll turn it over to Eugene to take it from here.
Thank you much. And this kind of goes in hand in hand with a lot of things that were said just within the last 5 to 7 minutes. Senator Sturgeon brought up, I was just jotting down, speaking about the importance of messaging. Tika, Ms. Hartstock brought up the same thing. So I think it's going to be important that the engagement about the referendum reform will be, it has to be a two-way street. And I like Tika's point about finding new ways to connect with people, not using the old way of doing it, everyone come out to this said place at said time and it's like the same said people. Finding new ways to engage. So I really appreciate that. I like the thought that Senator Del Colo brought up as well. Also, we want to hear from community members and have their opinions inform our work. And third, effectively communicate about our approach in a clear, concise, and transparent way so that everyone understands that. I think that's the most important. Make sure everyone understands what is going on, what's it about, what the goals are, and the impact that the change will have for the individuals, for their family, most important, and the community at large. So even with that said, I will go to the next slide where we would love for you to give us your ideas as to what may be some of the best ways for us to engage community members. Obviously, you see what Tika brought up, the town halls, the one pager, getting it out using social media, working groups, questionnaires. I like the idea of maybe mobilizing people within communities, door knocking around this issue. I think that could be a great idea as well. So just like to get just some of your thoughts. Are we missing, and these are just guided questions that if you want to take a look, if you have any specific ideas, in particular about what stakeholder groups should be at the table, who isn't involved that should be involved, what strategies do you think are most effective, what information needs to be included in said questionnaire, and some of the methods to circulate communications to the stakeholders, and other methods that we should use. So, and also, most importantly, are you willing to talk with the specific stakeholder group that you represent about the referendum reform? I know Senator Sturgeon has, and many others with a group have come to share their ideas to the committee. So we appreciate that. And what action steps so we can carry out the engagement. So here's just a couple questions. If anyone has any thoughts based upon this, we welcome any thoughts, ideas. You can put them in the chat, or if you care to raise your hand or pop out, any specific questions, ideas, or thoughts that you may have.
Eugene, this is Anthony Del Colo here.
Sure.
For stakeholder groups, I think there's some very obvious ones out there, but I think in some ways we really have to reach out to some of the less obvious ones, almost like looking at something like maybe the AARP or groups that represent people who are maybe their grandparents, but perhaps they don't have a child directly involved anymore. Maybe they have that fatigue that some folks have alluded to with paying property taxes and other things. I think that leaning into that and really reaching out to them and getting input and doing a very thorough job of this is going to be pivotal. I think that we stand the opportunity, if we frame this appropriately, not only with how it affects our kids, but how it affects the entire ecosystem of our communities and the quality of life of Delaware and Delawareans. And it affects our kids, it affects the quality of our labor force eventually, it affects job availability after that. If we're not growing the pie, then we're having to slice ever larger pieces out of the pie that we have. And this is, to me, like baking a larger pie, as opposed to figuring out a way to slice it better. So there are a lot of folks that, to me, might be fiscal conservatives or have developed a viewpoint like that, especially as they've gone through life and maybe are not as directly involved in the education system anymore, that I think we should reach out to.
Thank you for those thoughts, Senator Del Colo. Does anyone else have anything jump out to them? Specific way we can engage? I like, as Ms. Tika Harstock said, really connecting at the ground level, actually knocking on doors, getting out and engaged with the community, and also I think someone put in the chat. I think it was Mr. Wire. First, I think I got to find it. Well, I know it was something around the idea of even taking a step back to get some of why the issues that came up in committee being able to kind of like backtrack some of the steps, get some more support from that perspective, and then kind of use that as also helping to shape the messaging and the narrative as we move forward as well. I just couldn't find who said it in chat.
Kristen Dwyer.
Kristen
said
Dwyer,
that
yep,
we could
that's who it
get
was.
those. And Nami, you can get that from Sarah Wooten.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Will do.
But you know, one of the things that you might want to think about,
Mhm.
taking your show on the road to senior centers and hear what their complaint is, why they oppose referendums, and maybe we could find a compromise.
All right.
Indeed.
Thank you for that.
One thing we've been successful, a group in engaging is actually the realtors, because they're so invested in what's going on with, you know, the communities and selling homes and whatnot. But I will say, and you can see just based on the membership on the meeting, there is nobody stronger than parents and the teachers who are passionately and directly impacted by what happens to the kids. And for all of this, I think that their passion is what drives it, because it is about the students. And so I think, you know, and they become the ambassadors themselves, right? Knowing this, as you see us on you know, this, I have two roles because I have kids, and these things deeply impact them. And so I think in the reform efforts that Representative Chakota talked about, I mean, I think that's our first go-to is engaging parents and teachers.
Thank you.
And I would just say, Eugene, on one point, as far as some of the points mentioned by Tika on that community, direct community engagement. I mean, having been a member, a president of our local neighborhood planning council, through our civic associations, our block clubs, we truly have to have that community in that community just engagement at that level in order to get the message spread, almost as was mentioned, like a political campaign where candidates come and speak to these groups. We're going to have to do the same thing to really get out, speak to these community associations, these civic associations about what this truly means, and to get support and truly build that support, almost as we say, house by house, community by community, because it impacts all of us. Our schools are truly our hearts, you know, the center of our community. So when we make that connection again, that's truly a way in which we can try to build that alignment and build that support.
Absolutely, really good point. And I'm not trying to put you on spot, Tika, but I saw you put something in chat and I wasn't fast enough to read it. So would you mind sharing with us by any chance? If not, I can try to pull it up. Let me see.
No worries, I can as soon as I get myself off of mute. No, I just shared that I think it's also important to let people know after, you know, say after the bill gets passed and money is started to be increased, how is that money being spent? And I said, similar to maybe how people run annual giving campaigns, like, thank you for your contribution. Because of that, we were able to do the roofs on 3 of our elementary schools, blah, 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 blah. But something that lets people know afterwards what the money has gone to and what you've been able to do it, versus like, oh yeah, they've taken this and I never know anything, and kind of disengaged again.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I like that, Tika. Almost like a reporting in the bill where the districts will report back. Absolutely.
Yes.
That's really
So
good.
again, that would sway more people like me to take a side.
We're getting there.
Yes, I'm telling you.
Indeed. Thank you, Tika. Does anyone else have any questions, thoughts, or ideas? I'm just going to scroll around.
Hey, just on that last comment about how money's being used, I know we have the online checkbook, we have the online P-card reporting. There are some public tools where people can see how the public is spending money. There's also the open data portal. And so I know that the open data portal has a lot more capability than what they're doing as far as showing expenditures. And so, you know, I know that every CFO on this call, you know, we say we believe in transparency. We do believe in transparency. It's just that it's hard to really put information out there in a form that people can understand. And I think that if we look at that open data portal, it may have some capabilities that can help us be more transparent and build trust between the school districts and the community. So that was just in response to the comment about how money's being used.
Thank you so much, Mr. Longfellow. All right. Well, I thank everyone. And I think we're going to go to the next slide, which I think is Representative Chakwocha. He's going to give us
just our upcoming meeting dates. Our next full consortium meeting for the full body will be October the 22nd, again at 5 p.m. through 7. And then the upcoming funding and governance work group meeting, our next meeting will be November 5th, again at 5 p.m. And then there is a week in between. We're thinking maybe that November 12th, and for potential, that slot maybe for town hall. And we're seeing town hall as a way to try to just attract feedback, to get feedback from our communities through a certain mechanism. And again, this is where we're not just thinking our immediate communities, but trying to spread this up and down the state so that we can hopefully begin to get more input from all 3 counties. So everyone's participating in this dialogue. So that's what we're hoping to set for potentially that day. And then November 19th, and following that, and then December 3rd. These are our meetings. And again, this funding work group, our next scheduled meeting would have been the 22nd, but because of the full consortium meeting, we will not have that meeting that day. Next slide. And now we're going to open up the dialogue. If there are any additional comments from either from the members on the call or members of the public who have joined in, you can raise your hand or just be recognized verbally, and we will give you the opportunity for public comment.
Well, I guess that means our group answered a lot of questions today, I guess. There was already a lot of dialogue.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a great discussion and truly a lot of insight. I thank all the representatives and senators who participated on the call, really added a level of just understanding. I believe our CFOs in understanding from the school's financial aspect of what this really means, and then how can it be carried out. A lot of the comments Tika is presenting regarding that community engagement, it really gives us a path forward. We understand the issues at hand. Now, how can we bring all of these voices into this piece of legislation where we can address these concerns, ultimately with the goal of providing this necessary and needed funding for our children. And I don't see any hands raised. So if there are no additional comments or questions, public comments from individuals of the public, I will thank everyone for participating in the meeting. Again, we will have notes, and as was mentioned, to get the notes from the hearing that was held for House Bill 129, we will ensure that we get those and get them out to everyone. Again, thanks everybody. Thanks everyone.
I would like to thank everybody for inviting me, and I hope I'll stay engaged. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Representative Jakes, really appreciate this.
Thank you. And there are a few things that Representative Jakes and I have shared, some veterans concerns, the student count bill and this bill. And I mean, with every part of me, it is my intent to keep pushing on them just as you have session after session. These are true equity issues and issues that we will continue to fight for, just like our veterans have given so much to our country. It is up to us to do the same thing for our children, to give them the opportunity to live in a society that is just, one that is fair and provides them with the opportunities that are needed to meet the challenges that they and our nation will face in the future. So thank you, sir.
As I always say, the basic building block of our society is education.
Yes, sir.
Without a good education, you can't go very far in this world. So We got to keep working for education. I thank everybody for all they do, day in and day out.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank you. All right. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.